3 days before Christmas, my family told me not to come. 2 days later, they saw my face on the cover of Forbes. The message came through the family group chat 3 days before Christmas. I was standing in my kitchen, phone in one hand, coffee going cold in the other, when the screen lit up with my mother's name. For a second, I thought it might be an address update. Or a grocery list. Something ordinary. Instead, it read, "Skip Christmas, you'll ruin it." No greeting. No explanation. Just that. My name is Claire Donovan, and in that moment, I felt something familiar settle in my chest, not shock exactly, but recognition. This wasn't new. It was simply clearer than usual. The messages underneath followed quickly. A thumbs up from my father. A laughing emoji from my sister. No one asked how I was. No one asked if I was okay with this. The decision had already been made, and my presence had already been deemed a problem. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I could feel the urge to explain rise up automatically, like muscle memory. To ask what I'd done wrong. To promise I'd be quieter. Smaller, easier to manage, but I didn't type any of that. I typed one word. Okay. Then I set the phone face down on the counter. The apartment was silent again. Just the low hum of the refrigerator and the city breathing outside my window. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself this was fine. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about Christmas. This was about being erased and finally deciding not to fight it. In my family, everyone had a role. Not the kind you choose, but the kind you're assigned early and never allowed to outgrow. My sister, Emily, was the obvious one. Loud, polished, effortlessly charming. She knew how to fill a room and make people laugh at exactly the right moments. My parents loved to say she had presence. Teachers adored her. Relatives bragged about her. She was the story they told with pride. I was the footnote. Growing up, I was described with softer words that sounded harmless but carried weight: quiet, sensitive, independent. They weren't insults exactly, but they were limits. Code for someone who didn't shine, didn't impress, didn't photograph well at family gatherings. At birthday parties, Emily stood at the center, candles glowing while everyone sang a little too loudly. I hovered near the edges, holding plates, collecting wrapping paper, told I was so helpful. At school events, my parents clapped for me politely, then leaned over to ask if Emily was next. It followed me into adulthood. Emily's career was discussed at the dinner table like a headline: promotions, connections, timelines. Mine was mentioned only when someone asked, "So, what is it you're doing now?" The question always carried a pause, as if they were preparing themselves for disappointment. I learned early how to take up less space. I didn't argue. I didn't correct assumptions. When I achieved something, I softened it, framed it as luck, or skipped mentioning it entirely. It was easier than watching their expressions shift: confusion first, then disinterest. I wasn't rejected outright. That would have been simpler. I was tolerated. I was invited when I didn't disrupt the image. Included when I blended into the background. And slowly, without anyone saying it out loud, I understood my place in the family wasn't to be seen. It was to not get in the way. In my family, holidays were never about warmth or connection. They were about presentation. Every Christmas was planned like a production. The tree had to be perfect. The table settings coordinated. Outfits were discussed days in advance, not for comfort, but for how they would look in photos. My mother cared more about symmetry than sincerity. Everyone smiling. Everyone in place. And I learned very quickly which place was mine. I wasn't excluded outright. That would have caused questions. Instead, I was positioned, carefully asked to arrive later, sit off to the side, help in the kitchen while conversations happened in the living room. I became useful, not central, invisible, but necessary. There were years I brought thoughtful gifts and watched them be set aside while Emily's presents were opened with enthusiasm and commentary. Years when my stories were interrupted halfway through, redirected towards something more exciting. I told myself it didn't hurt. That I was being mature. But maturity, I realized later, was just how I learned to swallow disappointment quietly. Holidays magnified everything. The favoritism. The silence. The unspoken agreement that I was easier to manage when I asked for nothing. If Emily shined, The day was a success. If I faded into the background, even better. By my mid-20s, I stopped hoping Christmas would feel different. I showed up, smiled when expected, cleaned up afterward, and left early. No one noticed when I slipped out. No one asked me to stay. The truth was, love in my family had conditions. You were valued if you enhanced the image. If you fit the narrative they wanted to present to the world. And I never quite did. So when that text arrived telling me to skip Christmas because I would ruin it, it didn't come out of nowhere. It was simply the most honest thing they had ever said to me. For the first time, they weren't pretending I belonged. And strangely enough, that honesty hurt less than all the years they made me believe I almost did. That year, Christmas arrived quietly. There was no frantic packing. No last-minute grocery runs. No rehearsed smiles in the mirror before walking into my parents' house. For the first time in my life, I wasn't preparing myself to be tolerated. I woke up on Christmas Eve to a pale winter sun spilling through my apartment windows. The city outside was moving slowly, wrapped in cold and anticipation. Somewhere, families were gathering, tables were being set. Photos were already being planned. I made coffee and let it sit untouched, staring out at the street below. I could feel the familiar urge to reach for my phone to send a message smoothing things over, asking if I could stop by just for a bit, to reassure them I wouldn't be a problem. That urge had always been there. Years of explaining myself had turned it into instinct, but this time I let it pass. Instead of traveling home, I stayed where I was. I ordered takeout from the small Thai place down the block. I lit a candle. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sat on the couch, listening to the quiet hum of the city rather than the forced laughter of a room where I never fully belonged. I didn't feel dramatic. Or angry. Or even particularly sad. I felt tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of justifying my existence. Tired of proving I deserved space at a table that was never meant for me in the first place. For the first time, I didn't explain myself to anyone. I didn't defend my absence or apologize for it. I simply existed, exactly as I was, without performing, and somewhere between the candle burning low and the snow beginning to fall outside, I realized something simple but terrifying. If they only wanted me around when I disappeared, then maybe disappearing was no longer my responsibility to fix. There was an entire version of my life my family had never seen, not because it was hidden but because they never thought to look. While they were busy discussing Emily's milestones and timelines, I was building something quietly, piece by piece. No announcements. No celebratory dinners. Just long days, late nights, and a kind of focus that comes from knowing no one is waiting to applaud you. After college, I moved cities without much fanfare. I took a small apartment, worked jobs that didn't sound impressive, and learned quickly how to survive without a safety net. When things went wrong, and they did, I didn't call home. I solved them. When things went right, I didn't share. I learned early that my success made people uncomfortable, especially when it didn't fit the version of me they'd already decided on. So I stopped offering details. Over time, that silence became intentional. I didn't want advice disguised as doubt. I didn't want my choices dissected or minimized. I didn't want my achievements reframed as luck, timing, or someone else's influence. I wanted ownership. I worked with people who judged me by results, not family history. I learned how to negotiate, how to lead, how to walk into rooms where no one knew my last name, and earn my place anyway. The work was demanding, unforgiving at times, but it was honest. It didn't ask me to be smaller. And slowly, without anyone noticing, my life became full. Not flashy. Not loud. But solid. I paid my bills without stress. I built savings. I made decisions without asking for permission. I chose privacy over validation because peace was worth more than praise. My family never asked what I was doing, and I never corrected their assumptions. They believed I was drifting. Underachieving. Falling behind. It was easier to let them think that, than to watch them try to claim something they had never supported. By the time Christmas came around, the Christmas they decided I would ruin my life was already far beyond their imagination. They just didn't know it yet. And for a long time, I was grateful they hadn't asked. I saw it before anyone else did. It was just after 8 in the morning when my phone buzzed, not a text, Not a call, but a notification from a news alert I'd almost forgotten I had turned on. I was standing by the window, watching snow gather along the fire escape, when the headline slid across my screen. There it was. My name. My face. On the cover of Forbes. For a moment my body didn't react at all. No rush. No smile. Just a strange stillness, like the world had paused to make sure I was paying attention. I sat down slowly, phone still in my hand, and stared at the image reflected faintly in the glass. I remembered the years of silence it took to get there. The meetings where I wasn't taken seriously, the risks I took alone. The nights I wondered if choosing privacy over validation would cost me more than it gave. And then, almost immediately, I knew what would happen next. I didn't call anyone. I didn't post anything. I didn't send a single message to the family group chat. I made coffee and let it cool, watching the city wake up while the rest of the world did what it always does: spread news faster than truth ever travels inside a family. It took less than 20 minutes. My phone started lighting up like it was on fire. First my sister. Then my mother. Then my father. Missed calls stacking on top of each other. Messages piling up without space to breathe. Is this real? Why didn't you tell us? We're so proud of you, call us now. The same people who told me I would ruin Christmas were suddenly desperate to hear my voice. I imagined them gathered around a phone, refreshing feeds, reading the article out loud in disbelief. I imagined the shift, the sudden scramble to reconcile the version of me they dismissed with the one the world was now celebrating. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. For the first time, I wasn't waiting to be believed. I wasn't trying to prove anything. The truth had arrived without my help, without my explanation, without my permission. And it didn't ask me to soften it for anyone. I let the calls go unanswered. Not out of spite, but because something sacred had happened in that quiet apartment before the noise began. They didn't discover my success through me. They discovered it the same way everyone else did. Too late to control it. Too late to rewrite it. And far too late to pretend they'd been there all along. By the afternoon, the family group chat had transformed into chaos. Messages poured in faster than I could read them, long paragraphs, voice notes, screenshots of the article. Links sent back and forth as if repeating it would somehow change what it said. My mother wrote first, her tone suddenly soft, almost fragile. We didn't know, Claire. If we had known, things would have been different. Different. The words sat heavy on the screen. My father followed with a shorter message, practical as always. We were just worried about how much pressure you were under. We thought staying away this year would protect you. Protect me from what? Being seen? Emily's message came last. It was carefully written, every sentence polished. I'm proud of you. Truly. You should have told us. Family celebrates together. I stared at the words, recognizing the familiar pattern. Not one of them apologized for the text. Not one acknowledged how easily they had erased me. Their regret wasn't about what they had done, it was about being caught on the wrong side of the story. They wanted to rewind time. To adjust the narrative. To make room for me now that I fit. Calls kept coming. Invitations followed. Come by for dinner. Let's talk. We miss you. The urgency was unmistakable. It wasn't about reconciliation. It was about access. I typed, erased, typed again. Then I stopped. For years I had rushed to make them comfortable, to explain, to forgive quickly, to smooth over moments that hurt me deeply. I had mistaken silence for grace and endurance for love. This time I didn't. I sent one message. I needed support before I needed congratulations. After that, I muted the chat. There was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting. Just a quiet boundary settling into place. The apologies kept coming, but they landed differently now, hollow, delayed, shaped by embarrassment rather than understanding. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt clear. Some doors don't close with anger. They close with clarity. And once you see the difference, it's impossible to unsee. That Christmas, I didn't ruin anything. I spent the morning the same way I had the day before, slowly, quietly, without the weight of expectation pressing on my chest. Snow fell outside in soft, unhurried flakes, covering the city in a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. I made breakfast for myself and ate it by the window, watching strangers pass below, each of them carrying their own versions of family and belonging. For the first time, I understood something clearly. What my family called ruined was simply the moment they lost control. Christmas was never about my presence or absence. It was about preserving an image that required me to stay small. When I stopped shrinking when the world saw me clearly without their permission, that illusion cracked. And illusions always feel like loss when they fall apart. I thought about the years I spent trying to earn space at a table that was never meant to expand. The explanations I offered. The achievements I softened. The silence I mistook for peace. None of it brought me closer to being loved the way I needed to be loved. What did change everything was choosing myself quietly, without drama, without asking anyone to understand. Success didn't heal my relationship with my family. Boundaries did. I didn't block their numbers. I didn't announce a final goodbye. I simply stopped chasing approval that only arrived when it benefited them. And in that stillness, I found something I'd been missing all along: self-respect. If you've ever been told you would ruin a room just by being yourself, I want you to know this. You were never the problem. The problem was a space that only valued you when you disappeared. Christmas wasn't ruined. It was revealed. And for the first time in my life, I welcomed the new year without carrying the weight of who I was expected to be, only the quiet certainty of who I already was. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Telling this story wasn't easy, but it was honest. If you believe I did the right thing by choosing dignity over approval, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your support matters more than you know, not just for me, but for anyone who has ever felt erased by the people who were supposed to love them. If there's one lesson I hope you take into your own life, it's this: you don't need to shrink to keep the peace. Boundaries are not cruelty. They are self-respect. Success means nothing if it costs you your sense of self, and silence can be powerful when it's chosen, not forced. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share your own experiences below. Let's remind each other that we're not alone.